What I'm going to show you has not yet been published. It's in the process of being written up and published. So I have a disclaimer in the front. I have a disclaimer on some of the slides. But basically, there's a disclaimer that I'm showing you unpublished material. So now, without further delay, I'm going to talk about land change forecasts and vulnerability assessments associated with those forecasts. A lot of groups have helped fund this effort. I outlined some of these groups here. It's really been a collaborative effort over the last 2 to 3 years developing this latest version of our land change model, which I'm going to show you. The basic outline for this presentation is why forecast future growth, how do we do it, the role and importance of scenarios, the results and model assumptions, and then I'll kind of end with talking about vulnerability, which is kind of a twist on all this. So why do we forecast future growth? Well, the population has more than doubled since 1950. The trajectories from the local level show that that's not going to change. This adding 1 million plus people to the watershed, even though the rate is slowing, the base is growing. So that 1 million plus per decade is predicted to continue, certainly out to 2050. I think that's a fairly reliable, I'm not a betting person, but I'd probably put my money on that. So that means by the year 2050, we may have another 5 million people, increasing the population of the watershed from what's currently around 18 million to more like around 23 million. Another reason to kind of look at growth is the Bay TMDL. So why is that important? Well, the Bay TMDL says it's a total maximum daily load. It's a pollution diet on how much pollution can enter the bay. And it says that over the next 10 years, at least from this year to 2025, all the implementation actions needed to restore the bay health have to be in place. Now, the ecosystem is going to take much longer than that to respond, groundwater lag times and a lot of other factors. So now we're talking more than just 1 decade. We're talking decades into the future when we expect to see kind of probably a full ecosystem response. And like I said before, by 2050, the population is going to continue to grow. We're going to add another 5 million people. But according to the EPA and the TMDL, all new loads have to be offset. I mean, we're trying to reduce the loads of nutrients and sediment that are going into the bay from current levels, maintain that reduction as the population continues to grow. And that is an incredible challenge, and that really warrants a very critical look at growth trajectories and where that growth and the magnitude of that growth in different places. Other goals that the Chesapeake Bay Agreement in 2014 have committed to that warrant kind of land change characterization and forecasting are things like increasing forest buffers, expanding urban tree canopy, expanding the acres of submerged aquatic vegetation, creating additional wetland acres, characterizing rates of impervious cover change. All this requires kind of net measures of landscape change. This program is very experienced about tracking things we do, but they're not very experienced about tracking the net change. What is it that we're not doing that others are doing that are affecting our goals? For example, cutting down trees in the riparian area for whatever reason. We're not tracking that yet, but we hope to with the high-resolution data. And then things like assessing the vulnerabilities to healthy watersheds. That really requires kind of looking into the future. So in addition to the TMDL objectives, the healthy watershed goal warrants looking into future change. So we built this model. And basically what this model does is it creates 30-meter resolution simulations of residential commercial growth onto the landscape, informed with a variety of different data sets. And what we do is we take population projections produced by the localities and employment projections, and we say, fine, if your county is going to accommodate another 10,000 people in the next decade and another 20,000 jobs, we think that that might have an effect on the bay and on loads, on habitats. What might that effect be? And that's kind of what this model is designed to do. And Fred Arani, sitting in front of me, has done all the coding for this model over the last 2 years, and it runs really well. So we take population projections, we convert that into a housing demand, we account for infill and redevelopment, so in a sense we lop off a portion of that demand, and so that is going to be absorbed by the existing infrastructure. And this is real, and it's critical, and a lot of models ignore this. Renee Thompson has been critical in developing our infill component of this model. So then once we account for infill, the rest of it's going to be greenfield development. So that means it will result in the conversion of forest or farms to development. And it might be either residential or commercial development. We take into account, in terms of where growth may occur, is the land protected or unprotected? Is it developable according to soils and slope? Then we look at historic patterns of growth and predict and estimate the residential probability spatially and the commercial growth spatially as a probability. We look at road gravity, controlling and influencing the shape of growth in the future. And we actually use a lot of land use data, so we're not just simulating land cover change, but land use change. So for example, a 2-acre lot may only include a 1/4 acre of impervious cover, but it's actually a 2-acre land use change. So we're trying to account for that too. And then we spatially implement all this and create a future land cover map by imposing the growth, overlaying the growth on kind of the present base conditions. And then Quentin Stubbs has developed code in R that enables us to summarize 101 iterations. We run this model for any out year 101 times. And then we summarize statistics on what's the average, the standard deviation, the mean, the median of how much growth, commercial growth, residential growth, impervious cover, housing change, population change for any user-defined unit. So in our case, it might be small watersheds, it could be critical habitats. Any spatial unit you want to use as the summary unit can be used in the model. There's a variety of assumptions that go into this and go into any model. For us, it's urban growth is driven by exogenous estimates of population and employment. We don't produce those projections. Those come from the counties and the states. Growth is constrained at the county level in that it doesn't spill over to adjacent counties. Growth attracts growth. There's kind of a magnetic effect of growth, which we see in the observed data. Residential and commercial development generally becomes more dense over time, particularly closer to the urban areas. Infill, for now, those infill rates we calculate empirically, but they're held constant through time. And like I said, there's no spillover. So infill, let's start with that. So infill is basically the amount of development occurring within urban areas or on small vacant lots or already developed parcels. It's what's kind of absorbed by the existing infrastructure. So basically the way we calculate that is given observed growth in housing, and we figure out for any particular area what's kind of the highest expected housing density. So we say if the census tells us that we've got 100 more units of housing in a particular area, and the highest expected density for this region is 1/10 of an acre lot, then we figure what's the minimum amount of land cover change we would expect to see if those houses occurred on forest or farms. And then we look at what we do see with a Landsat record. And what we don't see, we assume to be infill. And technically, what we're doing is we're saying, what's the under-detection of land cover change by Landsat given housing and population change? So for any county, this is just an example we use, but with actual data. We look at current population, future population, translate that into a housing demand, look at current employment, future employment, translate that into a job demand, and then that's kind of our base demand. And we say, well, how much of that's going to be absorbed through infill? So we look, this is Howard County, orange is ag, green is forest, gray is development. All the yellow spots you see on the map represent locations of infill, of under-detection of land cover change. So for Howard County, from 2000 to 2010, 37% of the housing occurred in areas where we didn't see what we'd expect to be a land cover change corresponding with that amount of housing growth. So once we have we take our current demand, we lop off the top, the infill, we get kind of the results are how many households and how many jobs might result in greenfield development, which then would infer the loss of forest or farms. And whether forests are lost or farms are lost depends on a lot of different things. The overall demand relative to the amount of land available for development, the patterns, spatial patterns of forest and farmland loss, the densities of growth. If you have very low densities, a small demand is going to have a big footprint. One thing we really need from STAR is to understand the nutrient loads from land conversion. It's something we're really struggling with. Do you use loading rates, average loading rates for various land uses from the model, and do you apply that? Or do you use some assumption about growth, is going to be the environmental site design to the maximum extent practical, and is basically going to load like forests? What assumptions you make about growth and current loads is critical in interpreting this data relative to water quality. So in Howard County, we made some assumptions. We came up with future development is going to lead to a 3 million pound increase in nitrogen and 115 million pound increase in sediment. Now that's just based on one set of assumptions. We can map this and show here's new development, variability in our forecasts, where farmland conversion is going to occur in the red areas, forest conversion in the red. We can look at alternative future scenarios. And basically what we found is, through preliminary analysis, is that infill and redevelopment are much more effective than land conservation in in limiting the total amount of disturbance. But if you really want to protect the best of the best lands, you got to go with conservation. So what we need is really a combination of those two things in order to better manage growth. With that, I'll stop. Thanks.